You know, come 2026, there's this massive wave of new laws set to sweep across Utah. And we're not just talking about a few minor rule changes here. This is a fundamental reinvention of the state's relationship with its own citizens. It's really revealing a whole new and pretty ambitious philosophy of governance.
Okay, get this. The number is 582. That's how many new bills the Utah legislature pushed through in its last session alone. Just think about that for a second. This isn't just, tweaking the system around the edges. We're talking about a massive overhaul that's going to touch nearly every aspect of life in the state.
And what's really fascinating here is that this isn't just a bunch of random laws. Nope. Experts are actually pointing to a very coordinated strategy, a deliberate blueprint that they're starting to call the Utah model. So let's break it down. We're going to look at its three core pillars to really understand how this whole thing works. All right, pillar number 1. This is all about building what you could call a financial fortress. The whole idea is to make the state incredibly resilient for decades, and I mean decades to come. So the foundation for all of this, it's a pretty hefty $30.8 billion state budget. And that money is fueled by a real mix of revenue streams. You can see here that federal funds actually make up the biggest slice at 27%. But right behind that, state income tax is a huge contributor, bringing in 21% of the total pie. So where does all that cash actually go? Well, the state's priorities are crystal clear when you look at the spending. Social services and public education absolutely dominate, accounting for a combined 62% of the budget. That's a massive investment in the state's residents and, of course, its future workforce. But, for the average person living there, the financial picture is, well, it's complicated. It's kind of this tale of two taxes. On one hand, the state is cutting the income tax rate just a bit. But at the same time, local governments like Salt Lake County are hiking property taxes by almost 15% just to keep up with their own costs. So it's like the state is giving you a little break with one hand, while local pressures are pushing your cost right back up with the other. Okay, now here's where the financial plan gets really, really innovative. It's called the State Sovereignty Fund. The best way to think about it is like an ultra long-term savings account for the entire state. And it has a very specific purpose: to protect Utah from any future hiccups or turbulence in federal funding.
So how does it get funded? Well, that's the really clever part. It's not just based on random appropriations. The whole system is automatic. So, for example, when the state's regular rainy day funds hit their legal limits, any surplus just flows right into this fund. If Utah saves money on federal medical programs, those are the FMAP savings, a piece of that goes in. And if there's a huge, unexpected revenue windfall, yep, it gets captured too. It's just a really disciplined, systematic way to save for the very, very long haul.
And here's the part that's just, honestly, it's astounding. That money, it's completely untouchable for half a century. The legislature is legally barred from touching a single dime of this fund until the year 2076. It is literally a 50-year lockbox. It's a true endowment, and it's not built for us. It's built for our grandchildren.
Okay, but the Utah model isn't just about finances. Not at all. Pillar number 2 shows how the state is moving into setting some pretty prescriptive new rules for daily life, all under the banner of public health and safety. And one of the most visible changes you'll see is this new 100% ID law. Starting in 2026, if you want to buy alcohol in Utah, you are going to be asked for your ID. Every single time. It doesn't matter if you're 21 or 91. But there's a much bigger reason for this universal check. It's all about enforcing a brand new system. See, courts can now designate people with serious alcohol-related offenses, we're talking an extreme DUI, as interdicted persons. And what happens then? Well, those individuals get issued a special state ID that has a big, hard-to-miss red banner right on it that says no alcohol sale. So this law essentially turns every bartender and every store clerk into a frontline enforcer. All right, that brings us to our third pillar, and this is probably the most contentious one of them all: digital and intellectual gatekeeping. This part of the Utah model is all about regulating the content that's available to minors, both in schools and online. The number you see here is 22. As of early 2026, that's the number of books that have been banned from every single public school library and classroom statewide. And just to be clear, we're not talking about some obscure, unheard-of texts here. The list of books removed under this new sensitive material review law includes some really well-known and critically acclaimed novels like Wicked and The Perks of Being a Wallflower. They're often pulled for themes related to sexuality or violence. While, as you can probably imagine, this policy has triggered a massive legal battle. We're talking about a federal lawsuit, Vonnegut v. Utah. It's a coalition of civil liberties groups and even the estate of the author Kurt Vonnegut, and they are fighting to get this law struck down.
So what's their main argument? Well, the ACLU of Utah says the law is unconstitutionally overbroad. What does that mean? They're saying it allows an entire book to be banned based on just a single fleeting description of sexual conduct, completely ignoring the book's overall literary or artistic value. And that, they argue, is a direct violation of the First Amendment.
But this gatekeeping doesn't stop at the library door. It extends right into the digital world with something called the App Store Accountability Act. This imposes some really strict new rules on the big platforms, like Apple's App Store and Google Play. Basically, the law creates this tiered system of parental oversight based on age. So for kids under 13, they'll need mandatory parental consent for any download. For teens between 13 and 15, that consent is also needed for in-app purchases. And even for the older teens, 16 and 17, parents will get a notification if an app makes any big changes.
And of course, this has sparked a really fierce debate. On one side, you have the proponents who say, look, these laws are absolutely necessary to protect our kids online. But on the other side, you have opponents, including big tech industry groups, who argue that this violates the First Amendment and actually creates new security risks. This legal fight, it's far from over.
So when you take a step back and you put all three of these pillars together, that long-term financial planning, the prescriptive social rules, and all the digital gatekeeping, a really clear and cohesive picture of this Utah blueprint starts to emerge.
So the Utah model, boiled down, is really defined by these three core ideas. First, an intense focus on financial fortitude, building that long-term fiscal independence. Second, a shift towards prescriptive governance, prioritizing what they see as collective safety through behavioral rules. And third, a strong belief in intellectual gatekeeping, really asserting parental authority over the content kids see. When you think about it, it's a model that's as distinct and ambitious as the state's own iconic landscape. A very long-term, very deliberate, and, sometimes controversial vision for what the future should look like. And all of this really leaves us with a huge question, doesn't it? Is the Utah model a bold, responsible blueprint that other states should follow, especially in such an uncertain future? Or is it a constitutional overreach, one that trades individual liberty for state-mandated security? How other states decide to balance that equation is really the defining question that Utah, and maybe the rest of the country, is going to be answering in 2026 and for a long time after.